Okay, first of all, I come here this morning with my proverbial tail between my legs, with my head bowed. You see, God has a way of doing things in mysterious ways. Well, that works?
Yes, on PowerPoint it does.
Do you think we're going to try it again or not?
I can try it a little bit.
Okay, you want to try it? Okay. What happened was I love history, and I think that what you folks are doing here is magnificent, because this is an area rich in history. I've always loved history. My father loved history. And so about 5 years ago, I'm not from the area. I raised my family in Orange County, California. And my son moved here in about 8 years ago. And then my daughter had moved to New York State, and when she visited, she decided to move here. We retired to our motorhome so that we would be able to travel from New York to California to, we have a son in Las Vegas, a daughter in Northern California. We were just going to travel, and I run a ministry in Africa, so I do a lot of traveling, and the motorhome made a lot more sense. So once my daughter visited Heath, she fell in love with the area too. So she moved here, and today we have 8 of our 12 grandkids living within 1 mile in Heath. That's the first thing that God did. But the second thing he did that I'm a little bit embarrassed about is that about 5 years ago I visited the Historical Society over there by the park, and I thought this was great. And we talked about the church anniversary coming up, and I don't even remember who it was, gave me a folder about the church history. And I took that folder and I went back to California because I ended up having cancer. And I went through a long cancer battle, colon cancer. It was just, cancer's an insidious disease. Sidetracked me for a bit. And now I'm back. I do travel back and forth, but I'm back home. And my son couldn't make it this morning and asked if I would come stand in. Well, I love history, but I'm embarrassed because I still have your file right here. So I come in a bit with my tail between my legs, and I don't know, you sense God in these things. Well, today's my day of reckoning that God brought me here. So I just say that up front. But the area is rich in history. I've learned a lot. I've just grown to love this area. And I just think of 1874, the pioneer days, people coming from all over and settling here, planting their families, and just the extraordinary history. And we all know today, young people have young people have no idea what difficulty is. It's such a different world. And without the understanding of history and how things were, you can't appreciate what you have. It's really important, and I celebrate you for doing this. When I became enamored with this area, and in particular Heath, where my family lives, I knew that we have a family name by the name of Heath, and I thought, I wonder if we have a connection here. So I started digging to see if I could find the connection between John. I haven't yet, but I stumbled upon another Heath that I didn't realize were Heath. Many of you may not know that Sarah Palin's maiden name was Heath. She's a Heath. So I don't know if they're connected, but I am connected with Sarah Palin, I found out. Okay, so we'll just take a look back. This is a history that was compiled for our church service, and so I'm going to go through some of this. It was 1874 1840 when a road was built from Austin to the northeast to the Red River at the intersection of Kiamachi Creek, crossed over the East Fork of the Trinity River here. And that Trinity River, another interesting thing, and you know this, but one of the things I'm amazed at is that there are no natural lakes in Texas that were, except for one that was shared with Louisiana. There are lakes everywhere today. It's amazing. So you imagine what this Trinity River meant to this area. It was amazing. Okay, this area began to attract people because of the rich black soil. And of course, people having to survive by farming. That was essential. That was a big deal. That's when they saw this area as valuable. One pioneering family that came to this area was John O. Heath. He came in the spring of 1846 to visit a fellow friend from Kentucky, a fellow by the name of Dan Rowlett. And we know what happened there. John decided to settle here, and he brought his family down the Mississippi and Arkansas rivers, and then traveled by an ox-pulled cart to the land adjacent to the Trinity River. You know, that's another thing, transportation. You know, how transportation has changed. I used to think that my grandparents saw the greatest change because they went from cars to airplanes to men on the moon. But now, what's happening with, I mean, I shudder to think what's ahead for our kids. It's changing so fast. It's amazing. About the same time that John Heath arrived, the Sterling Rex Barnes family from Virginia settled on a 320-acre land grant on the east fork of that valuable, I'm sure, Trinity River. And Barnes built the bridge over that river, the Barnes Bridge, and people know Barnes Bridge Road. That was a toll bridge, and the tolls in those days were 5 cents for a footman, 10 cents for a man and a horse, 25 cents for a horse and buggy. Imagine it was outrageous. If you say, how can you? In 1866, Rockwall County took over the operation of the bridge. The area went through name changes before it became Heath. It was originally called Black Hills. That was the earliest name. And then it became Willow Springs. And then it was, it was in 1886 when the name Heath was chosen. So that was after the church was founded. The church was founded in 1874, and so it was originally named the Willow Springs Baptist Church. It's interesting. It was 11 people that first met here in a schoolhouse. They met in a schoolhouse that was located at the edge of the Pinion Farm. I'm not sure about that Pinion Farm. I'd like to know where that is today. The site was Pinion.
It's you know where Pablo's is, the strip center on Hubbard?
Yeah.
That old house that they redid?
Uh-huh.
That's Pinion Farm.
Oh, wow. Very cool. I'm going to spend some time with you. I love to hear those stories. That's great. So it was Elder James Vance that was first called to be the pastor, and the church agreed to meet quarter time. Quarter time meant they would meet once a month. Later, 2 acres of land was purchased for the church at the steep price of $55, probably outrageous. In 1890, a debt of $440 was paid off, and so they voted to put electric lights in the church. What modern conveniences. In 1896, the church voted to go halftime, 2 Sundays per month. After a tornado, which they called a cyclone in those days, destroyed the church building, a new building was built in 1898. And that became known as Smyrl Chapel. And many of you might remember that little chapel that sat beside First Baptist Church of Heath. That was beautifully moved to the Tate Farms, and where it's now been restored as a wedding venue. And it's kind of cool to have the old building still living. Okay, that building, the Smyrl Chapel, was used all the way to 2017, which is quite a while. The church voted in 1901 to join the Missionary Association of Texas. They bought new pews in 1901 for $300. Some of those pews are still located around the campus, and actually my son has one in his home. They also, in 1906, they decided to buy a heating stove, so they've got heat. Now, the early baptisms in those days were done at the East Fork of the Trinity River. That was where they were first done. But then they started using the gin tank in 40, and the gin tank and pipe, the W.E. Piper gin tank. And I don't think those were made bathtub gin. I think it was a different type of gin. Unfortunately. Let's see, it was 1910 when they changed the name to Heath Baptist Church. They installed a bell in the church, and one of the interesting things about this bell, many of you know that buffalo did roam this area, and that's and the buffalo used to go for water down to a creek that's on the Dar Estates named Buffalo Creek, because the buffalo used to congregate there. And when the buffalo would be heading to the creek, they would ring that church bell to make the kids aware that the buffalo were coming, so no one got trampled by the buffalo. What a different time it was. And so Buffalo, that creek became known as Buffalo Creek. And when the herds of buffalo finally disappeared, it was another smaller herd of golfers that gathered around Buffalo Creek. And they're still doing that. Let's see. First organ, 1956. Well, actually, they got a full-time pastor in 1948. It was a big deal for a full-time pastor. In those days, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, had a circuit of churches in Oklahoma, then Indian Territory was that he wrote. He had 5 churches. So they would go around church to church, and he wouldn't be there every Sunday. And so that kind of was the standard. Kind of another thing we take for granted is having a pastor full-time. And you can imagine, now we have several pastors full-time. It's quite a different world. Again, good to remember where we came, from where we came. Education was built, education building was built in 1973, and the current sanctuary was built in 1981 at a cost of $600,000 now. Yeah, $600,000. That's quite a bit different from the $55 of the property. Don't you wish you had bought tens of thousands of acres back then? If only your grandfathers or great-grandfathers would have realized. Okay, then the church became part of the Southern Baptist of Texas in 2003, and then it was in 2019 when the Stroh Chapel was moved to Tate Farms. It's a rich history, and one of the things I think about, and churches come and go, and people start new churches, and churches split, new churches develop, and that's all fine. But I think that there's really something special to be part of a historic church. And you just imagine how different things were in those days. I mean, when there was no lake, how did you irrigate your farm? I work in Africa right now. We're on a mission in Africa. We have a terrible drought there. In times of drought, it was terrible. And people, starvation was real. And there were bad years that people just, fought for survival. I've heard stories of ranchers having to feed leaves from the trees to their cattle just to keep them alive. What a different world. We don't think of it. But there's a pioneering spirit. I have this imagination that in those really tough times, the families would come to this chapel and just, be on their face before God, just, pleading for help, pleading for wisdom, pleading for guidance. I think how many times the church in those days, the historic church, played a far different role than they do today. They were community centers. They were places you'd go for information. They were places that you'd go for education. You'd go there for, if you were in times of trouble, you would go to the church. And I look now, and I don't want to get too political, but now when the government has taken over all of that, the welfare and everything comes from the government, where there is no, the government gives you the grants, but it gives you money, but what the church gave you was education, parenting skills, and marriage skills, and about faith and the hereafter. I think that there's something missing in the fact that church has lost that central meeting place and central focus of education and inspiration for our community. So, I don't know, that's, if you want to try to show the video, we can show that little video. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd be curious of any of your comments or thoughts.